Protests over the death of George Floyd. In Berlin, hundreds of people marched past the Brandenburg Gate and onto the US Embassy. Demonstrators in Copenhagen used banners brandishing Black Lives Matter. And in London, there were large crowds in Trafalgar Square. Physical distancing was abandoned, raising concerns about the possible spread of coronavirus in one of the worst affected countries. Europe correspondent Samantha Hawley reports.
As the protests raged in the US, in London hundreds took to the streets, marching from Trafalgar Square to the US Embassy.
Why can't the government protect us as much as they want to protect Dominic Cummings?
Social distancing disappeared as the anger bubbled over. But still, in the UK, the coronavirus crisis is dominating, with the death toll now passing 38,000. For months, Boris Johnson has been criticised for not doing more to contain the virus.
Good evening.
Now he's been warned again that he's moving too fast as lockdown restrictions are lifted further. This week in England, primary schools will reopen for reception, Year 1 and Year 6 students. Gatherings of up to 6 people will be allowed outdoors, and 2 million vulnerable residents who've been shielding will be allowed outside.
Obviously, this is a sensitive moment, but we can't just stay in lockdown forever.
But it's the scientists who aren't happy, and at least 4 members of the government's advisory group have spoken out. On Twitter, one of them, Jeremy Farrar, declared COVID-19 is spreading too fast to lift the lockdown in England. Last week alone, there was 17,000 new COVID-19 cases across the UK. Second highest rate in Europe after Sweden, which has a herd immunity policy. It's thought it will take 2 to 3 weeks before it's known if the lockdown easing has pushed the infection rate up. Samantha Hawley, ABC News, London.
The number of coronavirus cases in India continues to surge, despite the government imposing one of the world's most aggressive lockdowns in March. The country has recorded more than 180,000 cases after breaking yet another daily record of more than 8,000. The worst hit city is the financial capital Mumbai, which accounts for more than a fifth of all cases and deaths. Doctors there say the hospital system is overwhelmed. A warning, this story contains images some viewers may find distressing. South Asia correspondent James Oaten reports.
In one of Mumbai's busiest hospitals, the living lie next to the dead. This video, uploaded to social media, is just one of several in recent weeks, showing how Mumbai's health system is buckling as coronavirus cases surge.
In the ICU, there were 2 deaths, and we couldn't get the BMC to take away the bodies till the next morning because there was a wait list at the crematorium.
Outside the city's many hospitals, the sick wait, hoping to be admitted. The odds aren't good.
The nurses keep on saying, come back after an hour, then 2 hours, then 4 hours. I've been sleeping on the street for the last 3 days.
Intensive care units have for weeks been running at capacity. Patients are being treated on the ground. Some are forced to share beds. Others are turned away.
It just dwells on you. It kills you from inside to know that when you are refusing a patient, you are indirectly signing a death warrant for them.
What we are now facing is a sheer overwhelming of the system.
Entire families are being struck down by the virus.
My mother is still in the hospital. My father is also COVID positive.
On social media, businessman Manit Parikh implored social distancing after his grandfather died from the disease.
I honestly felt that my entire family would get wiped off.
Hundreds of frontline doctors and nurses have also contracted the virus.
It's an isolation ward for COVID positive patients,
Including Dr. Malvika Niraj, who tested positive last month despite taking all precautions.
First thought was, oh my God, I must have infected the nursing staff or my interns. God knows if I infected some of my patients.
A worry no doctor should have to endure. James Oaten, ABC News.
These are live pictures now from Rome, where the Colosseum is reopening after a 3-month shutdown. Strict social distancing and hygiene rules will be in place, with a cap placed on the number of tourists who can enter at one time. You can see there a few people are lining up to enter the Colosseum. The Vatican Museum is also opening today after a lengthy shutdown. There are a number of tourist attractions in Italy that are reopening on a staggered schedule, and travel is still heavily restricted until June the 3rd, but these sites will be accessible to local residents. So from today, Rome's Colosseum and the Vatican Museums reopen to the public. Also a major exhibition marking the 500th anniversary of the death of the Renaissance painter Raphael will reopen, and other sites will reopen over the course of the next few days, if they haven't already, including the Leaning Tower of Pisa and the Pompeii Archaeological Park as well, opened last Tuesday. Scott Morrison has conceded his government has regrets about pain caused by the bungled robo-debt scheme, but he stopped short of making an apology. The Prime Minister says the coalition is putting things right and repaying the debts, but with a class action still pending, the final cost to taxpayers could top $1 billion. Political editor Andrew Probyn explains.
Debt collectors came knocking at a heartbreaking time for Dash Jayasuriya.
I lost my mum and then my dad, then my friend about 10 months after that, and that's when I got the robo-debt.
Told she owed more than $7,500.
Good girl. Because it was such a huge amount of money, I knew that it couldn't be right. It was so ridiculous.
It took 6 months, but the university academic successfully challenged the computer-generated debt notice.
I knew they were wrong. So if I could figure that out straight away, they should have been able to figure it out straight away as well.
About 470,000 Centrelink debts, unlawfully identified by annualising average income, will now be repaid at a cost of more than $720 million.
The government has great regrets about any pain or injury that has been caused here.
Not exactly an apology, but close as you'll get from a government still facing a class action.
These are just word games from a government who's chronically incapable of accepting that it behaved unlawfully for years.
Scott Morrison says he's putting things right on robo-debt, but the class action may see the final taxpayer bill pass $1 billion. But these days, billions don't seem to hold the currency they once did. By week's end, the government will announce a $1 billion plus stimulus package for the residential construction sector. Means-tested grants of more than $20,000 for new homes and renovations.
It's not just the sparky and the plumber and the carpenter on the building site. It's also the timber mill.
Hurry up and develop a plan to save these Australian jobs.
Sector-specific support also being planned for the arts and entertainment industry.
What are we going to have? Furphy, of course.
Life as we knew it, slowly returning, pint by political pint.
I can't put it all down in one.
Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
The lessons are still emerging from this summer's bushfires, and this week the Royal Commission into the Blazes will hear calls for an overhaul of radio communication networks used by firefighters. Volunteers will tell the Commission authorities across different states often can't communicate with each other during an emergency. As Jess Davis reports, the situation has left border communities angry and frustrated.
The Victorian town of Walwa and the New South Wales community of Jingellic sit on opposite sides of the Murray River. When the massive Green Valley fire jumped the river the day before New Year's Eve, Victorian CFA volunteer Robert Newnham was watching on.
We could see the fire and we could see that there was people there, but we didn't know what they were doing or what was coming our way, really. We were just guessing.
They knew their New South Wales counterparts were less than a kilometre away, but they had no way of speaking to them.
We needed to know a lot more so that we could prepare more for what was coming our way. We've both got radios in our trucks, but we can't talk to each other.
For me, it's like, where's the common platform? The technology's there. Why haven't we got it?
This week, Mary Hoodless will tell the Bushfire Royal Commission how difficult the natural disaster was for border communities.
There's a lot of border crossings with populations that have been highly impacted by that lack of communication.
Former New South Wales Fire and Rescue Commissioner Greg Mullins takes some responsibility.
People like me have to take a bit of the blame for this because we didn't do a lot about it in years gone by, but it's now time to get that Australia-wide radio net. Technically can be done. It's just having the will to do it, having the money to do it.
RFS and CFA volunteers on both sides of the river hope the Royal Commission will result in the problem finally being fixed, bridging the divide between border communities. The New South Wales Rural Fire Service says liaison officers are deployed to help with cross-border communication, but acknowledges it would take plenty of work to permanently fix.
We can get angry, but the main thing is to get something done about it.
They're hoping to resolve a decades-old problem. Jess Davis, ABC News, Walwa.
You can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on iView. Here are the top stories on ABC News. Thousands of people remain out on the streets of major cities across the United States, defying curfews over the past 6 days. Riots have occurred late into the night with looting, buildings burnt and cars trashed. Largely peaceful protests have taken place during the day. The crowds are on the streets to protest the death of unarmed black man George Floyd. More than 10,000 National Guard troops have been called to duty as those large crowds remain on the streets. Curfews have come into effect as part of an increased effort to close down urban areas, but they're largely being ignored. Pandemic restrictions have eased significantly in several Australian states, with regional travel now allowed within New South Wales and Queensland. Pubs, restaurants and cafes in most states and territories are now permitted to seat more patrons. Physical distancing guidelines remain in place to prevent a second wave of infections. And Rugby Australia has axed more than 40% of its staff in a bid to stave off insolvency. The national governing body is citing financial woes that include the COVID-19 crisis. The interim Rugby Australia Chief Executive, Rob Clark, says the staff cuts are expected to be completed by telephone today. There's growing criticism of the heavy-handed response from police to the protests in the US, and there are many instances where the media get caught in the crossfire and journalists and their crew are arrested. Organisations that track press freedom say there have been dozens of acts of violence against the media. Some of those incidents have been captured on camera.
Press! Press! I'm press! I am press! Okay, I'm down. I'm down. Okay. Thank you. I am press. Please. I was just sprayed in the face with pepper spray. Currently have my head on the ground.
Get up, get in your car.
Okay.
We got plenty of time here.
Are you okay? I'm getting shot. I'm getting... Katie, are you okay? Rubber bullets, it's okay. It's those pepper bullets. It's those pepper bullets.
Who are they aiming that at? Nice shooting at the photographer.
At us, like directly at us. Directly.
Why are they doing that? He's shooting at our crew.
I don't know.
Do they not know that
obviously
they see the camera?
Right. They're telling us to move now, I guess, farther away.
Sir? You're under arrest. Okay. Do you mind telling me why I'm under arrest, sir? Why am I under arrest, sir?
Officer's with CNN and he's on the air right now.
Okay.
You are arresting him live on CNN.